And we're going to begin with the latest here in Ottawa, where Prime Minister Mark Carney will reveal his cabinet tomorrow morning at Rideau Hall. It's the team that will help Carney carry out his plans for the country. Louis Blouin is the Radio Canada Parliamentary Bureau Chief, and he's here with me now. Louis, tight-lipped compared to some things we've seen in the past. We know a cabinet smaller than 30, but with a group of up to 10 secretaries of state who have sort of a junior cabinet rank, privy councillors who can go to meetings. What else do we know about what we're going to see tomorrow?
Yeah, so first he's creating those two groups. So the second group, the ministers or secretaries of state, will not be part of all cabinet meetings. So he's creating two categories there. I'm going to be watching gender parity. So is there gender parity in the core of ministers, or we count the ministers of state in the lot? I'm told big change coming tomorrow. It's going to be pretty sweeping. They want to even mark even more the cut with the Trudeau era, the Trudeau government. A lot of new faces, more than half of the new faces that will be at Rideau Hall tomorrow. Half of the fifth, at least half, will be new faces. Exactly. So that's pretty big change. So I guess there might be some ministers who were there under Justin Trudeau might be a bit nervous. Who will be sidestepped or not? It's going to be quite interesting to see. But already there's some names circulating, especially in Quebec. What I'm watching, David, there's some familiar names. Of course, of those new faces, Nathalie Provost, who is a survivor of the Polytechnic drama, the Polytechnic massacre. Joël Lightbound, who is from the Quebec region. They need a minister in the Quebec region. And Jean-Yves Duclos was put aside in the last
former
shuffle.
Quebec lieutenant.
Exactly.
Right?
So now they need to send a signal. And that's what we're hearing, that Joël Lightbound. And he was seen at the Ottawa rail station today by our colleague Rafi Boudjikanian. That could be a sign. I'm going to be watching for Carlos Letao, who is the former finance minister in Quebec. Marjorie Michel, former PMO advisor to the former prime minister, who knows very well the machine of government. And also Mandy Galmatzi, who is a former Cree Grand Chief in Quebec. So these are the names that I would be watching in the province.
It's interesting, though, Louis, you go through it. We've got this list of 25 ministers who were part of the initial Mark Carney cabinet after he won the leadership. I get to 7 or 8 names that I'm confident are still in cabinet. There's 15 or so, I don't know. And some of those I'm pretty confident are out of cabinet. Like, there is going to be a lot of familiar faces here in Ottawa, political names. Maybe people have held reasonably senior cabinet posts, just not part of the inner circle going forward here. It's a whole new world in terms of what Prime Minister Carney wants and who he feels he owes things to.
And he says he wants a more focused cabinet. He wants a smaller cabinet. So with less than 30 in the core, that's the signal he's trying to send there. What I'm going to be watching to is for this big trio, Mélanie Joly, Dominique Leblanc, David McGuinty, but maybe I can say Quatuor with François-Philippe Champagne too. So there was the 3 ministers involved with the U.S.-Canada relations, Joly, Leblanc, McGuinty. I do not see these guys going away while they were sitting in the White House last week. That would maybe send a strange signal if they want to keep stability there. But, we'll see. What we're hearing is that there are no big changes there. He was asked last week, the Prime Minister, if he wanted to keep François-Philippe Champagne, and his answer was, did he ask you to ask the question? So that's going to be interesting. Also, I think François-Philippe Champagne did not jump in the race at the time to become the leader of the party. Probably was promised.
So he may stay and find out.
Yeah, so how could you put him aside? It could be pretty tough to do.
So there would be 2 people, when we look at the newcomers, who you would think could be finance ministers if Minister Champagne was moving. That's Carlos Letao, who you mentioned, who is a former Quebec finance minister. And then there's Tim Hodgson, who won Mary Ng's old seat. Chair of the Board of Hydro One, was an advisor to Mark Carney at the Bank of Canada, comes from a Goldman Sachs background. Either he ends up in a finance-type portfolio or in one of the infrastructure, natural resources, industry, something on the economic side that when you want to build, you want people who know how to build, and those are people that you've worked with in the financial sector, and he wants his people.
And Carlos Letao could be something like Treasury, somebody who knows numbers, who could look at, so that's speculation from my part, but that's the kind of stuff you could be looking about. Also, regional representation, that's for sure. Look at the prairies, Buckley Bélanger in Saskatchewan, who did this big red spot on the Saskatchewan map in the north.
You won Desnefé.
Yeah. Also, Eleanor Olszewski, who is in the north of Edmonton, who's a veteran. That could be an interesting casting there too. We're hearing also about Randeep Sarai. He's from British Columbia. He's a very good organizer there. He was very useful to Mark Carney during the election, but also during the leadership race. So that could be interesting. And Gregor Robertson, also former mayor of Vancouver, could be an environment role for him, maybe a green portfolio or something like that. That could be also something to watch tomorrow.
Yeah, British Columbia, the names I'm told to watch: Randeep Sarai, Gregor Robertson, Jill McKnight, Wade Grant, and Talib Noor Mohammed. In Edmonton, it is Eleanor Olszewski, possibly Corey Hogan, but with a gender-balanced cabinet and a lot of people in Quebec and Ontario who are men. There could be a numbers game. Buckley Belanger, who won the Northern Riding in Saskatchewan, former NDP Environment Minister in a provincial government there, former power panelist here on this show, so I don't know if that disqualifies him in the vetting. Manitoba, look for Rebecca Chartrand and Jeanette Levac as possibilities. In Ontario, Tim Hodgson, Evan Solomon, who used to host this show and is close friends with Mark Carney, and Ruby Sahota is someone to watch for there in the Bramptons. And then I think you've gone through the Quebec names like Claude Gay, Joël Lightbound, Natalie Provost, Anna Gainey, former president of the party. A name, we know she's been vetted, don't know if she has gotten in. Carlos Leitao.
But that could, if she gets in, some people could be uneasy with that because some echoes I got is that she was not very much involved in the last campaign, like in the work.
But her husband was. He was the executive campaign director.
He was, exactly. But her, it's going to be an interesting signal if she gets in or not.
And the other one's just to round out in Nova Scotia, Sean Fraser is going to be back in this cabinet. I think that was the offer that was made to him to get him to run again. Watch for Lena Diab, another possibility, a former provincial cabinet minister there. Tom Osborne in Newfoundland and Labrador is a possibility, and Rebecca Alty, the MP for the Northwest Territory. Okay, so that's where we are. We have a list of names and suspects and lots of rumors about who is out and some confirmations on who is out, but need a little bit more work.
And the fact that also nothing is kind of coming out, it tells you a lot about what kind of government I think Mark Carney wants to lead, like more discipline, more focus, and maybe that's something he gets from the private sector, or when he was at the Bank of Canada, when you prepare a speech, when you prepare a press conference, every word is important. Every word you use, and the information is kept secret until the last minute. Like, it could come from this background of his that he wants something more tight. For now, it holds. We'll see in the next few hours.
Okay, so Louis, half of them new faces, this extra tier of secretaries of state, cabinet of under 30. One last thing. We still don't have clarity on the core staff. This is unusual that on the eve of a swearing in of a new cabinet, we don't have definitive names on who will be the permanent chief of staff. Marco Mendicino is not expected to stay there long term. Tom Pitfield is the principal secretary, but people don't know if that is going to be long term or if it's just a bit of a placeholder thing. I've heard a couple of names, but I can't get it absolutely locked down.
So my colleague Laurence Martin was told that Mr. Mendicino is trying to stay on. We'll see if it happens. But there's also names circulating. There was Marc-André Blanchard, who is now at the Caisse de dépôt du Québec, but also was our ambassador to the UN for a while. And Mathieu Bouchard, who was an advisor to Prime Minister Trudeau in the past, but also was chief of staff to Minister Guilbeault in part. And I know that his name is circulating a lot. So we will see. Is there offers that have been made, accepted or not? For now, it's very, very, very secret, but this is a core. It is so important operationally for the Prime Minister and the way he wants to lead his government. One of the critics that was in the Trudeau government in the last years is that people felt it was difficult to get access to the Prime Minister, that decisions were kind of held off. It was taking time. That's a critic we're hearing from caucus. Difficult to speak with the Prime Minister. Now the vibe I'm hearing from ministers is that it's easier to speak with Mark Carney than it was to speak with Justin Trudeau, that they have access, that they can have long conversations with him, and they felt they're being consulted. So for now, we'll see. We'll see.
Right up until they get dropped.
It's the honeymoon, so we'll see where it goes from there. But already we can see some changes in the style of management.
Consulta right up until half of them get dropped tomorrow for new faces. All right, we'll see. All right, Louis, we'll busy day tomorrow. That's Louis Blouin, our Radio Canada Parliamentary Bureau Chief. Well, 2 weeks from today, Parliament returns and the House of Commons will need to elect a Speaker. to oversee debates and votes. And these are some of the MPs that tell us they are considering a run for the job. You've got Conservative MP Chris d'Entremont, who was Deputy Speaker in the last Parliament, Liberal MP Greg Fergus, who of course was the Speaker, Liberal MP Sean Casey from Prince Edward Island, Green MP Elizabeth May, and Conservative MP Tom Kimmich and Liberal MP Rob Oliphant. Those are just some of the names, and we'll see after Cabinet if more people decide to throw their names into the Speaker race. Okay, so for more on how Prime Minister Carney is putting together his new cabinet and all of the decisions he's got to consider, I'm joined by Michele Cadario, who is a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Paul Martin. And here with me in the studio, David McLaughlin, former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
Hi. Michele, let's start with you. As the Liberal here, I wonder if you've got inside information, but if you don't, that's okay. What do you make of what we're hearing, that the under 30 with 10 Secretaries of State and half of it being new blood?
Well, you know, in many ways, it's a throwback to Mr. Martin's cabinet and Mr. Chrétien's cabinet, and I think Mr. Mulroney before that, in terms of having kind of the two tiers. It is perhaps a little bit of a sleight of hand to get a slightly larger cabinet and still try and say that you're staying under the magic number of 30. I think that it's definitely been spun that there's going to be a lot of new faces. And now that we have members in every province, you can hope to see, and I would expect to see, someone represented from each region of the country and each province of the country. I'm really looking to see, the gender balance, and Louis mentioned this as well. And is that gender balance at the senior level of the main cabinet?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of plugging holes with these secretaries of state?
Yeah, the gender balance where it really matters and where you can really make a difference. Not minimizing the role of a Secretary of State, but that can't be sort of a pink ghetto, to use that term. David, I wonder what you make of this. The Secretaries of State, I mean, it does increase the size of the ministry and more privy councillors, but lower salaries, cheaper staff, they don't have full departments, and it sort of brings it back to where it had been until the Trudeau cabinet. What do you make of what we're hearing of the broad direction here?
Well, I think it's consistent with Mr. Carney's management style. I mean, he clearly wanted to have, as he did in his first go-around, he had a smaller cabinet right away. He made some choices. A good prime minister has to be a good butcher, as the saying goes. You got to be able to cleave off some of the old wood, the old meat, as it were, and he's not afraid to do that. This is his government. This is his win. He now needs to make it his own. So I think he has that kind of running room to shape it a certain way, but he wants to get some things done. And he doesn't have a lot of time to do things with what's happening with the world economy, the Canada-US relationship. So a smaller core cabinet of folks that are, he gives them some work to do and he gives them latitude and responsibility. But he's also going to recognize, and he seems to, they also need some support. So classically, ministers of state. So this is a bit of a throwback to the traditional model. I think it can work. Obviously, it all depends on the kinds of people that are going in there. But it suggests to me that he's approaching it very deliberately, very seriously, and we'll see tomorrow. I mean, how it all pans out.
Are you surprised by such a clear demarcation from the Trudeau cabinet? Because I know there was this pressure during the campaign to differentiate himself from the previous prime minister and government, but he won. Right? And so do you still need to do that, or is it just you need to give new energy and new life to your inner circle? What do you think, David?
I think he has to run as far away from Justin Trudeau as possible in political terms. I mean, it is his government. He won the election. He won it fair and square, and he won it in part by his own style, his own approach, his policy approach. And he also showed, kind of the approach he was going to take. He did change the size and structure cabinet a little bit. He had some different priorities already. So it's his government. He doesn't owe anything to Justin Trudeau or anybody else. And I think he will take advantage of that. And it's probably do it now rather than later.
Well, Michele, what's your sense of that? Because, there are a lot of people who were in the old cabinet, who were Trudeau era. A lot of them, played meaningful roles in the election campaign. But it seems like there's going to be a pretty big change of direction anyway. How do you view that thought process?
Well, you only have one opportunity to really put your stamp on your government. And he has now elected all of these members behind him. In a comeback that, is pretty unbelievable. And so I think he has a lot of latitude to be able to put who he wants into the cabinet. I'm sure that he will keep a few faces that we're very familiar with, and in particular, those that have been dealing with the U.S. file. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of change there. But, if he has different priorities, and he has said in his first press conference, this is about the economy. This is about building Canada. This is about getting things done. So I would expect that he's going to put some people in who, have that new energy and are ready to go. Kind of shake off a little bit of the governmentitis that many of us can get after 10 years in government, and really kind of and just re-energize it.
But Michele, if you look at the roster and you look at people who you assume were kind of drawn to run by Mark Carney's leadership, like Tim Hodgson in Toronto, Carlos Leitao in Quebec, the gender parity promise is a bit limiting there, right? So in terms of there's a lot of men that are seen as close and recruited to him. So how do you manage that? I mean, who do you expect to see definitely move into those roles? These are people with economic backgrounds and with the Build Canada sort of mandate of the government. They seem like people you need in either in natural resources or infrastructure or industry of these things. How do you, some thoughts on what you expect to see in these moves?
I'm sure those are good, solid people. I think that we should remember he is new to politics. He's been in government before, but this first budget that he's kind of coming up with, I'd be surprised if a brand new minister goes into finance as well, especially if the budget's going to be really quick. There's certain things that you have to get done in a short period of time. But I would also say he's got a lot of great women. Jill McKnight out in BC. Eleanor in Edmonton. There are fantastic women who have equally strong backgrounds, perhaps not in the niches of finance, but in a whole other host of things, who are incredibly capable and can very much be a senior cabinet minister. And there's no excuses why there won't be women in economic roles. Yeah,
and it sounds like there's going to be a bit of an overhaul in the BC ministries too, just because of retirements and change and people leaving and that sort of thing. David, what's your sense on focusing on the economic agenda to start? So where you think the Prime Minister may go with this? Dominic LeBlanc never did a fall economic statement. He never did a budget. If they move Champagne, he will not have done a fall economic statement. He will not have done a budget, which is, a little bit of trivia, but that would be an interesting thing. Do you think he holds the line on finance and finds other roles for the other financial people he's recruited?
Well, if he wants to, now's the time, because they haven't actually put any work into the next budget and the fall statement or et cetera. So now is the time to shake up the financial part of the financial management part of the government, Treasury Board and finance. And this is Carney's, this is his raison d'etre. He knows this area. He's going to obviously be a very strong Prime Minister in terms of imprinting himself on the economic financial direction of the government. So he's going to want to pick ministers for both of those portfolios, finance and Treasury Board, that he has a lot of confidence in and that he can work very closely with. So I don't think there's anything that's actually preventing him from making those changes right now, except for one thing, and that's really the political management of it. Does he want to have somebody brand new to Parliament who is like he is, who is not, in one of these core portfolios, who then has to take questions in the House and other kinds of things. So that too is part of it. But if he wants to make the change, I think now is a good time to do it.
Do you think he's kind of his own finance minister anyway? Or he's we know PMO has a hand on the pen of budgets, but like this feels like an extra strong hand on the pen.
I worked with Mark Carney when I was Chief of Staff to Jim Flaherty, and he was an associate deputy, and that, so he knows. He knows this area very well. Yeah. Obviously, former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor. So, in many ways, yes, he will be his own finance minister. So, I think here you're looking for two things. You're looking for somebody who is competent enough to keep up with Mark Carney, but also somebody who has that political and personal relationship to be able to get along with Mark Carney, because he is not going to be an absentee Prime Minister when it comes to finance and economic issues. Not at all.
No, you're not going to be able to bluff him if you don't know your stuff. I think that's a safe bet. But Michele, I wonder, I look at what's happening in Alberta and I look at what's happening in Saskatchewan. And, the movement in Alberta in particular to have this referendum and the challenges that Daniel Smith is making of this new government in terms of economic development and pipelines and resource development. It seems to me this Prime Minister needs a very strong economic hand in natural resources, right? It needs to be more of an industrial portfolio than an environmental portfolio without abandoning the environmental side of it. And maybe on infrastructure, industry, housing, other things like that. He needs real strong economic minds in those portfolios, especially with the Western challenges that are coming out of Alberta in particular.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think he needs strong managers. I think that throughout the public service, they're going to build a team that's going to start working in the direction that the Prime Minister sets. So, I think that part of the change also kind of stems from very much what the Prime Minister was talking about in terms of what he wants to see done. That's the message to the public service to reorientate yourselves towards that in terms of the advice that's coming forward. I think that it will be important. I don't think that Mark Carney is going to set his budget based on what Danielle Smith or Scott or Mo want to see at all, nor should he. But at the same time, I think that it sounds like he's bringing a lot of fresh eyes, fresh perspective to some of these portfolios. And, that might be a welcome change just to take the temperature down a little bit and maybe just restart some of these relationships.
But David, on that too, it seems like you want someone who would just full throttle on those departments, right? If you want to speed up project approvals, get a one approval timeline and get things moving to sort of offset the instability coming from the United States, that's what you're going to want in this cabinet in a pretty big way.
Absolutely. He's going to want to have strong ministers who are going to drive things, but he's also going to need to make some adjustments within the public service as well, because over 10, 12 years, things have atrophied a bit. Processes and ways of doing business, ways of looking at things have become settled in there. The system needs a bigger reset than just a change of prime minister, which we're getting, change of government, change of cabinet, which we're getting. We'll also be I think we should be watching to see what happens next, which is usually a deputy minister or senior mandarin shuffle or adjustment that comes in order to align with these kinds of priorities. You get a very strong sense of Mark Carney that he wants to get some things done, and he knows he doesn't have a lot of time to put those kinds of political economic points on the board. So I think we'll get some very interesting sort of clues of that beginning tomorrow.
Okay, just quick final thoughts. Michele, what's the number one thing you're watching for, either from a portfolio or an issue in the cabinet reveal tomorrow?
I want to see gender parity at the main table, and I'm looking to see if there's women in economic roles as well.
David?
Economic, energy, environment. Being able to manage that through, take the temperature down, keep the country together on that, and then move us forward. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Michele Cadario, David McLaughlin, always appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to name his new post-election cabinet tomorrow, and while the specific details are tightly held, we are expecting big changes. There will be fewer than 30 full cabinet ministers, but there will be up to 10 junior ministers, so-called secretaries of state, in addition to that core cabinet. And we know from our sources that half of the people taking the oaths tomorrow will be new faces. So who could we see at Rideau Hall in the morning? That's where we start with the power panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in studio, Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Happy Cabinet Eve, everybody. Well, welcome to the show. Vandana, it sounds like, either... Depends on how you look at it. Either this is a total refreshing of the cabinet or there's blood on the floor because a lot of people are going out. That's kind of the two expressions you hear from people when you're talking to them today. How do you view it?
I think you'll see people doing both ways. I think this is really going to be a mix of continuity, which is important, especially on the Canada-US file, but also some new fresh faces, some new experiences to come around the table. And this is exactly what people voted for Mark Carney. They wanted some change, which I think he's going to help deliver, but also a real precise focus on some key issues, particularly with Canada-US relations.
Have you got the full list there? Do you want to go through it from east to west? Anything like that? No? Lisa, what do you expect to see tomorrow?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this, David. Realistically, I made it through 6 or 7 of these cabinet shuffles and remained inside the cabinet, which I now understand and recognize as being quite the feat because there's a lot of folks out there who anticipated when they were running that they were going to come back as a minister, and they're not. And that's going to be a very big change for them. So it's going to be sad, but maybe they already know. I'm amazed at how much secrecy there is around it, and I applaud the secrecy around it. Well done. Now, we'll see whether or not anybody gets scoops tonight. But nonetheless, I heard earlier on your program, mentioning of Joel Lightbaum. I will tell you that I always thought he was a very measured and smart and capable member of Parliament. I was sad when he dropped out of being Parliamentary Secretary to Finance. And if he's in the cabinet, I'm really happy. I think he's a really competent person who speaks his mind and did it at a time when it was difficult to do so. And that's the kind of minister you want, someone who's going to speak truth to power.
Brad, Lisa admires the secrecy. I abhor it. I would like a few details at least, from between the hours of 5 and 7 here on CBC News Network. What's your take on the high-level stuff we're hearing about a pretty big refresh and a tiered sort of system, bringing back the junior minister, secretary of state kind of role?
Well, yeah, and I think that we know this because there are certain people within this government and in the Prime Minister's office who want us to know this. So it's selective leaking, and it's the same every cabinet. On this day, the day before the cabinet swearing in, they give us a little bit of nuggets so that we're not completely shocked the next day. And I think it's fascinating how many different places you hear the same thing. Under 30. 10 or so parliamentary secretaries. Here's what I'll be looking for. Secretaries
of State. The parlsecs will be in addition. They will be in addition.
Very important. Very important distinction. Yes, that's what I'm hearing that very thing as well. So what I'll be looking for is how I think there'll be a break from the Trudeau, so I think there's going to be some blood on the floor, and a lot of people will say, ooh, that's bold. I think we already been signaled that. Mm-hmm. How does he deal with certain areas of the country that that were not well represented in the Trudeau cabinets, plural, and that'll be I'll find to be incredibly interesting. Who does he give the big challenges to? Things like the energy corridor, things like the natural resources, not the files per se, but getting our resources to market. Challenging that. We've already seen Daniel Smith, starting to, set up the separatism referendum, and we've, the signatures we'll talk about in a bit. But nonetheless, I think his cabinet will send a big signal: continuity with Trump in the White House, but differences for Western Canada. That I think is a thread that I'll be watching him to see how he threads that needle.
Okay, and just to explain to people before I get to my old boss, Mr. Russo, the difference between a cabinet minister and a secretary of state. The secretaries of state are privy councillors. They will be able to go to cabinet meetings. They will be able to sit on cabinet committees, but they won't go to every cabinet meeting. They won't sit on every cabinet committee, and they won't have the big staffs and the big departments, and they will have smaller salaries than a full cabinet minister. The Trudeau government kind of flattened everything out so that everything was the same. So the Minister of Finance, salary-wise, got the same as the Minister for Southwestern Ontario Regional Economic Development. Mm-hmm. This is going to revert it back to that kind of tier system, that your mainline core departments that have ministry, full departments are full ministers, and then there'll be secretaries of state feeding into that. So that's just for the people keeping score.
And ministers of state are completely different beasts as well. Ministers of state were able to go into cabinet as well, but we're real ministers. I'll be watching to see how many people from the core group are new. We keep hearing that half the people going into Rideau Hall tomorrow will be new. Does that half figure include a lot of new people who haven't been ministers before? If I'm advising the Prime Minister, and thank goodness he's never asked me for advice, but what are his priorities? And you go from there. I would suggest that his priorities are national unity, given what's going on in Alberta, and national prosperity, given the threat from the United States and what Canada requires in terms of change. And that requires a change in the way of thinking. If you're Mark Carney and you campaigned on change and you actually turned your back on much of the last 10 years of the Liberal government, that change has to be manifested in your cabinet. So I'll be looking to see how many of the core group are new in order to manifest that change. I do have to kind of laugh though when I hear about people talking about this as a smaller cabinet. It's not that small if there are 40 people marching through Rideau Hall. I know they're not full ministers, but how many of them, of the sort of secretaries of state, are ministers in training as well? That's the other thing that I'll be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a G7 country, so that you got to have, there's a certain volume you're going to have
with regional requirements.
Exactly.
As Brad said, who is going to be the person who deals with the threat of secession coming from Alberta? That question that was released, it's going to get the required number of signatures for a referendum. Somebody needs to deal with that. Well, nobody in that elected from that province can do it. I suggest it's going to have to be the Prime Minister himself as an Albertan.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, it has to be the Prime Minister. It's a question of national unity, just to begin with. But to go back to his priorities, Vanda, that Friday press conference that Mark Carney gave, and in the first couple of sentences said, to deal with the U.S., to grow the economy, and people also want safer communities, and they want help with the cost of living, right? And housing being a big part of that. That right there tells me what the core priorities of his cabinet would be.
It's a conservative platform.
Well, yes. Well, we'll see in terms of how it gets implemented. But what are you looking for then in terms of who the ministers are? I mean, does Minister Champagne stay in finance, or does a guy like Tim Hodgson go into finance, or does he move into an economic role focused on one of those priorities? How do you maybe view things?
I think what you'll also see is people who can handle the files, but also the political undertones of those files, right? So I think things like finance, I can see him wanting a counterweight, someone he can either, run through ideas with, and maybe that could be someone new, I don't know. But it also, I think he's very much aware that while you are focused on the U.S. and housing, a number of things can bubble up, and anything can cause a political issue to your government. So who is also top political ministers who can handle that without any, oversight or hand-holding, and can manage those things? Because while they may not be in the top tier, those issues can also come through fruition. And I think sometimes what happens, and some of my learnings in the past government, is that you become focused on so many things, and it's hard to actually get things implemented. So how do we also put some core people in there who can manage things if things are catching on fire, so they don't have to come up to the Prime Minister, and he can focus on things like the border, on prosperity, on unity, etc.
So does that mean leaning on more of your experienced ministers and keeping them in?
I think putting them in certain places. I think you'll see some experienced ministers probably in those areas where fires can come through very easily, that things that maybe not be expected. But also I think some fresh ideas will come forward. So I think where some of those new people come in is where some fresh thinking is needed to show that change to Canadians. Okay, well, how is this going to make my life easier? Because I understand the U.S., but I have a cost of living. I need to buy a house. So maybe some fresh people with a new take on things, to give that perspective.
So Lisa, I don't know if he's going to reach out to any of the Conservatives to implement this conservative agenda as part of his conservative, not conservative government. Though who knows? They need a couple to get the majority. Who knows what happens tomorrow? I mean, who do you expect to see in some of these core portfolios? They have recruited people with economic backgrounds, but they actually have people in every province now and in the north. I mean, where do you think they go on the core economic issues on this?
I would like to see Tim Hodgson go to NRCan because he's a deal maker, and I think that's what NRCan's going to be all about. It's going to be about
that's one of the hot rumors out there. I don't know if it's just trying to fit type to issue or if it's actually happening, but that seems like it makes sense, right?
Well, you got to think about departments that are heavily burdened with legislative obligations, where you have to go to committee, where you've got a ton of legislation that you got to get through, stuff that you're amending, versus the kind of minister who is going to be doing the boots on the ground kind of negotiation that you're going to need, both with oil and gas companies as well with the provinces along the way. So, and stakeholders are plentiful without a question, and it's a trade exposed part of our economy. So that to me makes a lot of sense. I don't know where Philippe Francois Champagne go, but I will say that, I know that the Prime Minister was trying to be funny, but if the Prime Minister was funny about me in that way in a press conference, I would not be happy. I would be kind of gutted and embarrassed about the whole thing. I get that, it's fun in social kind of chit chat, but this is real political reputations, and I found it to be a little bit demeaning, to be honest. So I hope he's in cabinet, and I hope that he's back in finance, and they can get past all that.
Brad, what do you expect to see on the economic side of things? Do you think it will be the people who have been there, or because, it's all about shaking off the slow-moving economic agenda, they need to go with the new blood on things? Yeah.
So the key here is not to make a bunch of predictions, because all you'll do is, unless I get 100% of them right, I just expose how, and I know absolutely nothing. But here's what I'll be looking for.
We're time-stamping everything you say, Brad, just to be ready for it.
Well, I like the bold predictions there. We'll roll the tape next Monday and see who parlayed. There's no question that in the election campaign, the economy was Prime Minister Carney's #1 focus, and so for him to put the stamp on that, and he recruited a number of people to run with him at a time perhaps where he wasn't going to be necessarily a lock for the re-election. I think that he would be putting his stamp on it if he made some bold choices like finance and gave Trudeau's finance ministers and those other portfolios. Now, the challenging thing with Champagne is that when Champagne came out to support Carney for leader, he said that they were forging a partnership. Now, I don't know how long that partnership was to last or what the nature or the scope of that partnership was, but it would certainly send a signal to the country that if he puts one of his people in that portfolio that wasn't in that portfolio before, that would send a signal that things are different.
He did put Champagne in that portfolio, though, right? Because Dominic LeBlanc was Justin Trudeau's last finance minister, so that was the move. So I don't know if that would be continuity and change, Rob, or what it would represent. But if Minister Champagne were to move tomorrow, you'd have 2 consecutive finance ministers who never delivered a budget, which is a bizarre thing to be in. But what do you think happens there? Do you think it is new or
you used
what?
an important word there, delivered. If you're looking at the Trudeau ministers, who delivered? Who dithered? Who has a proven track record of actually getting things done? If you look at Mr. Carney's leadership campaign, he was critical of some of the people who were in the finance portfolio. He didn't like the way the government spent money, and he made that clear. Who has a proven record of delivering in the finance portfolio? Carlos Letao has. He delivered several budgets in the province of Quebec that were balanced. Unlike others, he reminds me a little bit of Jim Flaherty in that, yes, he was a newcomer to federal politics, but Jim Flaherty had a very good record at Queen's Park.
In a big province, right?
He was fire-tested, battle-tested. So I'd be very surprised if Mr. Letao wasn't in some sort of economic portfolio tomorrow.
Or a place like Treasury Board, something like that, right? Where you're making government work with efficiency. I don't know. Vandana, do you have a list of who dithered and who delivered that you want to reveal? I mean, what's your sense of how new the economic team might be?
I would say, to Rob's point, he actually makes a really good one, and he always does. But I mean, I would say paying attention to who delivered, who didn't do well, who stood out to Mr. Carney while he may not have been a prime minister, he was watching, and I think he picked some notes. So I don't know how much will be a mix, but I think there'll definitely be a mix of people. I think you'll see some new and some old, but I think he'll focus on a mix of new experiences and ways he wants to think about it, and he's been thinking about this for a long time. He has a vision, and those who also get it, have done it, but also have trust of caucus, because as you said, there will be people with feelings. There always is. At every cabinet shuffle, there's going to be people with feelings. How do you manage that? And they know that it is still a minority parliament while they are the government. That caucus relations is going to be very important. So who also can manage all those pieces?
So just on that, because I wonder about the caucus relations part, because it sounds like it's going to be a pretty dramatic change. And this is what people who've worked on the campaign, people who are still in government are saying. How concerned do you think he is on that when they were not going to win 40 seats until he came along, and then he got like 43% of the vote and had engineered, to in no small part, the biggest political comeback in recent Canadian political history?
He will know a motivated and happy team is a team that can deliver, right? And that's the bottom line. So whether it's through him or his ministers, that relationship is going to be important. If caucus don't feel, and he's also seen what happened in the last prime minister and what happens when caucus is not happy. He's not going to be, immune to that. So what he will want is also ministers who can handle that. He doesn't want to have to also sit down and babysit or manage everyone's feelings. He wants ministers who can do that job as well, right? It shouldn't just be on him. He has a big job to do, but that is something that I'm sure Lisa will agree, that's all of cabinet's job. To manage your caucus relations. And if the caucus member comes to you with an issue that pertains to their riding or their community, that you answer to that. And that's going to be really important to him.
Okay, Lisa, quick thought on that, and then we're going to switch topics. What do you think?
I don't disagree with Vandana about that. I mean, I think it's going to be important to pick cabinet ministers with people skills. I think the biggest shock for anyone coming into a cabinet green or coming to political life green is it's not just about running the government. That's actually probably the easiest part of it all. If you're a seasoned executive, what really matters is the people side of it and how you guide your staff, who are young and they probably never had a job before in a lot of cases. So it is a learning experience for everybody. Setting up your constituency office, like that is number one. That's the most important thing you can do. Last thing that I would say on this topic, David, is that there's going to be a honeymoon period when they go home for their summer barbecue. They're probably going to hear nothing but good things from their constituents. Let's see what happens in the fall. And the minute they start grumbling at home, that's when MPs will start grumbling in caucus. But other than that, I think it's pretty clear shot between now and Christmas for them.